talked to Jefferson White. Jefferson White said his craziest fan theory he ever heard was that Casey was really dead to start season 4.
Yes.
And he's like, oh, that theory was crazy. I'm like, oh, I don't know anything about that. Whoever had that theory must have been nutso.
As season 4 of Yellowstone draws to a close, there are more questions than answers about who attacked the Duttons and why, and what's to come from most of the key characters. This season has been a slow boil, but with John and Jamie set to square off and a key character being killed off the show, that slow boil looks to be spilling over. How much will we find out before the end of season 4? I'm Addison Hager, and that's one of the key topics of today's episode of Dutton Rules, a Yellowstone 1883 podcast. Yes, there is a spoiler about who died in episode 8 and why he or she needed to die, but the key scenes involving Rip, Beth, and Casey will get a deep dive as well. For example, what's up with Casey and all the wolves? And whose side is Beth really on? A scene involving the cast of 1883 began this episode, and Billy Dukes and I will try to better explain that action before digging into the modern Dutton family drama. This is your source for the breakdowns and cast interviews, and more of both are coming. In fact, on Friday, we promise an interview with Cole Hauser and Piper Perabo, so if you've not yet tapped follow, please do it now so you don't miss their insights into the characters of Rip and Summer and their roles in Season 4. Also, leave a rating and review and let a friend know about the podcast. And email staff at tasteofcountry.com with your questions, reactions, and theories. The crazier, the better. Every response comes from either myself or Billy Dukes, who is going to join us right now.
Hello, Addison!
Hello, Billy. You're pretty chipper for an episode that ended pretty dang dark.
It's amazing. I keep thinking we're going to be getting more answers than new questions, because we just have 2 episodes left, but I feel like we have a whole bunch of new questions to still be answered in like 90 minutes of television.
Well, completely agree, but I will say, the question for me that has been answered, and you know I'm a Team Faith Hill fan with Margaret Dutton. Personally, I think that she's killing it, but my question has been answered that she's just really stepping up to the plate and didn't know that beforehand. But I want to know your personal opinion, because I know you've been a little iffy I know you've been full send for Tim McGraw and his character, but Faith, now the scene that they opened up with her talking to her boys and just seeing them, you know, she's reprimanding them for the type of prayer that they had and that they were joking about it, and you just see a different side to her. What were your thoughts on this scene?
Well, first, a little bit of a production note here. If my audio sounds different to everyone, it's because I am in northern Michigan at my father-in-law's house, and I forgot my microphone back in my Tennessee studio, so a little bit of a different recording situation. I apologize for that, but it's one time only. As for Faith, I thought that was her best scene to date. Really believable there at the dinner table with her boys. It felt real, felt sincere. I thought she was really strong there just in that sort of short moment. And then at the end of that scene, when a bloodied James Dutton comes back to the house, she reacts like you would kind of expect. And yeah, I mean, I'm slowly coming to the Team Faith side. I think she's really meeting the bar that was set, and early on already exceeding it.
Yeah, completely agree. And I will say, in that scene, just to tangent real quick, where was Elsa?
This is interesting, because I had a conversation with Sterling Whitaker about this as well, and he's on the podcast quite a bit, and he asked me that. But don't forget, the very first thing, and now if people haven't watched 1883, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but not really. But 1883, the series, what's the first scene? Right out of the gate, the first thing we see that happens to Elsa.
Oh, she dies. Right?
There you go. Why are you asking me where Elsa is?
Well,
she did.
I thought that was...
I mean, we think she dies.
Okay, I guess that's true. I thought that scene would be farther along, and the scene that they played on episode 8 was before that, but... I see what you're saying, that could be a potential.
I'm led to believe based on the chronology because, okay, so stick with me here. The 2 kids at the dinner table, one's a teenager, one's like 8, 9 years old. The teenager is the 5-year-old. So we're 10 years later. down the line.
Yes, okay.
Now, we don't know that Elsa dies. We just know that she takes an arrow through the gut. She could kind of survive that somehow.
Maybe.
The other possibility is, by this point, Elsa would have been like 27 years old. She might be married off and raising her own family. Like, she likely wouldn't be at the Dutton dinner table at this point in her life.
That's true. Okay, never mind then. I just noticed that, but that completely makes sense of the age there, and so not to panic. Not to panic yet. No need.
Yeah. Well, hold on 1 second, because a few things did happen there in that scene that I think are important, more so to 1883 than Yellowstone. Like, I don't know how this scene is going to affect Yellowstone. Earlier in season 4, we had that scene from 1883 that actually moved the plot of Yellowstone forward. This one seems to be just kind of plugged in as almost like a preview for 1883. But Tim McGraw's character, James Dutton, seems to die in this scene, which is something that's interesting. But you also learn that he had 2 sons, John Sr. and a young boy named Spencer. And there was a great reference, and if you watched all 4 seasons of Yellowstone, you would have picked up on this. He hung those guys and pinned a sign to them, just like John Dutton and Rip did to end season, somewhere deep in season 2. They hung a couple of men up outside of Malcolm Beck's door and put a sign to him that basically said, "Return to sender." I thought there was a kind of a cool parallel to be drawn there. Like, different year, same trick, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And there that line came in again where he said, "I don't care if you live or die, tell them about me."
And then he dies. And James Dutton dies.
And then he dies.
Bummer.
Well, kind of moving on to Yellowstone, this last episode. My favorite scene by far and cringiest. I mean, the entire time I was like, oh man, this slow moving car crash was the one with John, the dinner table, Beth, Rip, and Carter, which I would love for you to just give fans, before we dive into that awkward moment, give fans a little bit of a catch up to who Carter is.
His story's been a little bit stop and start throughout season 4, so I think maybe some people might have forgotten Carter's origin story. Totally agree with you, by the way, that scene was awkward and it was really long and not much happened, but it was still kind of amazing to watch. But Carter came to the Yellowstone Ranch after meeting Beth kind of by happenstance at the hospital. Beth was caring for her father, who was in a coma at the time. Carter's father, as it turns out, was also in a coma. He had overdosed. He was dying, and Carter knew that. And Beth kind of helped console him a little bit, and she saw a little bit of herself in Carter at the time. So they just kind of made a friendship. He didn't come to the ranch, and I don't think until 2 episodes later, when the sheriff, Donnie Haskell, brings him to the ranch because Carter says that Beth is a friend of hers or a relative of hers, so they agree to take him in. From there, it's been a little bit hit and miss. He really did Beth wrong, had to make it good to her, which he did last week. Rip at first hated him and thought he was a thief, and then he started to see a little bit of himself in him, so he agreed to at least keep the kid around for a while. And now they seem to kind of be at a point where they are a quasi-family union, although I use the word family really, really loosely.
Really loosely. But that's kind of a little bit why, during this dinner scene, to paint the picture of why it was awkward, it's just funny scene, it's very elaborate. And that's what ends up kind of unhinging Beth, because she's like, this is not normal for our family. And you're trying to, Dad's trying to paint this picture that's not, and I'm losing my mind because this is not normal. What are we doing here? But it's funny scene. Clearly Rip is out of place. I mean, from the point where he goes to sit down, kind of looks at John of like, is this where I take off my cowboy hat? Do I put it on the table? What do I do here? I mean, fish out of water, where normally we don't see Rip in a fish out of water situation. He, commands the attention. He knows what he's doing. And this is a scene that's fun to see because he doesn't know what he's doing, and it kind of rattles him a little bit. And I also love seeing Carter, who looks like he hadn't taken a bath in years, is all polished up, hair looks like it was combed. He looked like he took a bath. But for me personally, and I don't know if you agree with this, what I loved about this scene, even though, yes, it is so drawn out, and it's one of those just the entire time I was gripping the table going, okay, like, when are we done? When are we done? But when Beth goes off, she loses it. She's like, this is stupid, ridiculous. What the heck is happening? She goes off. Rip follows her. What I love when they come back and they end up, going into a different room that's more casual. And he says to her, where he said life is plenty hard to Beth. That moment for me was one of these things that solidified how good Rip is for Beth, that he kind of calms the fireballness of her. And I think that scene specifically, even though it was drawn out, it really solidified me of like, this is why they are good for each other.
You see a little bit of why women love Rip so much in that scene as well.
Yeah.
Like he can calm Beth down and kind of take control of this woman who is in a lot of ways crazy, but he can sort of tame her. And I think there's something attractive about that. I heard a great interview with Cole Hauser and Kelly Riley. I was actually listening to Jefferson White's podcast, the official Yellowstone podcast, and he was talking to both of them. And Cole revealed that the character of Beth reminds him of his sisters.
Huh.
And so everything that Beth does, like he, the actor, thinks is kind of funny. Like he's really familiar with it. So he's almost like super well suited for the role of sort of this Beth Dutton emotional caretaker kind of role.
Huh. I
liked that scene a lot as well. And they end up at the little small table, which is like, I don't know what room that is. Is that like the family room? There's like a little small dinner table?
Yeah, it almost reminded me of like a little game table in a family room. Something where, meals aren't necessarily had, but it's a smaller circular table.
Poor Gator had to bring his whole dinner spread off to this whole other table. The dude. Like, there's all this drama going on. He's like, I'm just trying to cook dinner.
Right.
Dang it, Beth. You ruined another one.
Yeah, last one was her having him make wheatgrass for Summer.
Well, let's go there next, because Summer and Beth have an alliance now. They seem to be both working against Markwood Equities in sort of this covert way. And Summer leads a protest right at the airport, and Beth helps make sure the media is actually on hand to see them all get arrested kind of violently. And in doing so, she plays Markwood Equities pretty bad, because Markwood Equities thinks that she's going to kick the media out. They end up being there, so it's a really bad look for Markwood Equities. Do you think that Beth and Summer are true allies, or do you think that Beth is setting up Summer for some sort of revenge because she hooked up with her dad?
I want to wish and hope for the best for their relationship. Beth has not consistently proven to keep her word like that. And so, when I saw Summer being carted off at the end when the SWAT team comes in, and I have to say, I kind of thought, well, good luck out there. Like, I don't, Beth kind of got what she needed for right now. So I don't personally see, I don't know. They could really surprise me, but I don't know if that's going to be a forever alliance. What are your thoughts?
It does seem that if Beth doesn't follow through on that, then Summer becomes sort of this loose end that could kind of out Beth's real plans. So maybe selfishly, Beth may need to stick with Summer through this.
Yeah, because essentially Summer would have blackmail on Beth.
Yeah, she'd have leverage on the situation. And I don't think the Markwood Equities team has figured it out yet. They kind of zoom in on Carolyn Warner, and she doesn't kind of look like she knows who had just sort of gotten her. Like, it's not clear that she knows what's up quite yet. But I think she's going to figure it out here before the season's end.
There's a lot of things that need to happen before the season ends.
There is so much that needs to happen.
You're listening to Dutton Rules, a Yellowstone 1883 podcast. I'm Addison Hager, and this week we said goodbye to a major character on Yellowstone. It was a death we should have seen coming, and in a moment, Billy will explain why. Quick reminder to tap follow and leave a rating and review if you're listening on Apple Podcast, and to email us at staff@tasteofcountry.com with questions and your own analysis.
Okay, so let's
break it down.
Let's rattle it off.
Okay.
We have a governor's race coming, imminent. Now that I feel could bleed into season 5 somehow. I don't expect a resolution there. We have what's happening at the airport, which I think will resolve this season.
And also, with that being said, Summer and Beth's relationship.
I still feel like there's some hinged drama within the bunkhouse that, like, I don't feel totally settled with the Lloyd situation quite yet.
Which we haven't. This episode 8 was kind of the first episode that we didn't really touch on them.
Yeah, we didn't see anybody from the bunkhouse this episode.
Nice.
And once again, we barely saw anybody from the reservation. Or Mo was in a phone call. But I feel like there's much more to come from that plot line. In this episode, we also learned that John still thinks our buddy Riggins...
Oh, poor guy.
...is the one who tried to kill him.
If only he knew.
So I can't figure this out. Casey asked Jamie to look into this.
Yes.
He never followed up? Like a phone call or a text like, hey, by the way, how's life? Good. Oh, yeah, by the way, my wife's pregnant again. Oh, Jamie's like, oh, by the way, I have a son now. Like, they never had that sort of catch-up. And like, oh, did you talk to that one guy? I mean, it's no big deal. I mean, maybe get to it if you got time. We're just, trying to figure out who wanted to kill us
Dad?
all. If you could, like that call. Yeah, that never happened. And I can't figure out why. Like, Casey's kind of dropping the ball a little bit there on the follow-up.
That is true. Almost like, oh, okay, well, didn't really hear from him. I'm going to go worry about the wolves on my property.
Right, yeah. Well, we're going to get to a big spoiler here. So if you've not watched the episode, there is a key character who dies in episode 8 of season 4, and we're going to talk about that next, because there is a theory that Casey could become the new sheriff, if even on a temporary basis.
Okay.
Because he is the livestock commissioner, and as we've learned to end episode 8, Sheriff Donnie Haskell is the one who is killed at the very end of the episode. A really key character throughout 4 seasons of this show.
And Billy, I have some thoughts on his death, if you're ready to dive into that.
Yeah, it was pretty pivotal, and there's a lot of ways this can go. What do you see happening?
Well, really, I kind of feel like Donnie's death potentially pivots John's run and plan for governor. And the reason why I think that is, number one, him going in, guns blazing, not waiting for any type of, authorities to kind of help back him up. That might not be beneficial for him. They may see that as he was reckless, all the above, because aside from Donnie, it seems like other civilians were killed in the gunfire. We don't know that necessarily for certain, but the way that it's edited and stuff, in my opinion, it looked like that. And so, seeing his behavior of how he handled that, I think could be a negative, along with, I think, having this now be covered by the news. This almost could be Jamie's leverage to use this publicity of his father that is potentially a negative. This is Jamie's chance to pull any skeletons out of the closet and also make news, because his dad's already, in the spotlight. I see that potentially going poorly for him. And then in addition, this is more of Rip, but Rip is attached to John. Rip doesn't have any identification. If you remember, that's why him and Beth can't get married at a courthouse, because he has no ID. Well, if he gets questioned by police, even
right,
to have a statement or anything like that, he doesn't have any identification, which I think is going to be a major red flag and potentially publicized and talked about. So it could be bad news that reflects on John. So I think that this is nothing but a potential negative towards John's running that I think might work in Jamie's favor.
It could be a real hornet's nest, you're right. They could also play it like John Dutton is the hero, though. Like, he is the one who saved all these diners from this robbery. First of all, the robbery I don't think is connected at all to the attacks. That looked like a classic, like, those guys look like meth heads. They were just looking for money. I didn't think that was connected, but they could paint him, spin that as he's a hero in this, and John could come out looking good, too.
That's true. I can also get on that. I'm going to stay in my lane over here with my theories, but we'll see who's correct.
Well, the interesting thing with Rip is this isn't the first time he's kind of gotten himself jammed up with the law, and the last time I can think of actually involved the sheriff. This is back in, I believe, season 1, maybe season 2. Rip shoots a bear, and he's trying to save a couple of tourists, as well as rid the Yellowstone Ranch of this bear that's been kind of wreaking havoc. And because he shot a bear, it brings in the federal wildlife, and he has to deal with a couple of legit agents, one of whom gets really injured really badly. They're riding horses together, and her horse goes crazy, and she ends up kind of getting speared by a fence, but Rip stays with her and kind of treats her and makes sure she gets the help she needs, and they bring in another agent. Nowhere along the way at that point did anybody ask Rip for his ID or try to take his name or anything. The sheriff was in charge of that investigation on the local level, and the degree to which he knows of who Rip really is never was clear. But even he didn't ask, hey, who is this guy? Where did he come from? What's your real name? Or anything like that. So they might kind of gloss over that, but maybe not. I feel eventually that plot line is either going to come up as an assist or a hindrance to what Rip's trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
We need to talk about one thing really quick is the reason why the sheriff had to die. There was a real-world reason why Donnie Haskell had to leave the show. He was a good character. He was on all 4 seasons. He was usually a friend of the Duttons, sometimes a foe. But he is the one who brought Carter to the ranch, as I mentioned. He helped the Duttons attack the Beck brothers. He's been there he was involved in that shootout at the beginning of season 4. He's kind of been an ally for the Duttons every step along the way. So the Duttons did lose a real key ally with the death of Sheriff Haskell. So who's going to fill that role is really, really important. If it's not a friend of the Duttons, that it could unleash some of the skeletons out of the closet. But the actual actor is named Hugh Dillon. He is the co-creator and a co-star of another Taylor Sheridan drama called Mayor of Kingstown. And I think his death was imminent because you can't be on both shows at the same time. I think he just had to pick a show. So maybe we should have all seen this coming, with Mayor of Kingstown doing pretty well on Paramount Plus as it is. So R.I.P. Donnie Haskell. He was a good character, but you had to get going, buddy.
Had to get going. And that last scene, how they ended it, heart-wrenching. Where he went to call his daughter, and they didn't even give him a line. Yeah.
So now we need a new sheriff. Toss that into the numerous other plot lines that need to get answered here in the next few episodes.
Adding that to what, number 10?
I have a theory on this as well. This is one of the key frustrations, not only about this season of Yellowstone, but I think the Yellowstone as a whole. There's just so much going on, so many plot lines that seem to start and stop. But in some ways, Taylor Sheridan kind of writes the story as if he doesn't know where the story is going.
Right.
And I think that's kind of how life is. When you're living in these moments, your life has a lot of stories that start and stop and don't ever get finished. So it's kind of genuine and real to that point. He knows, I think, where episode 10 is going to go when he starts writing episode 1 and 2, but he doesn't write the action in the moment as if he's trying to get there. He writes it for the moment.
Right.
And that's both frustrating, but I think it also adds to the realistic nature of the show. I don't know, maybe I'm giving him too much credit.
Really, that was good. That was very profound, very much of a mic drop moment. I'm gonna give you that.
Well, I had a lot of time to think about this on the drive from Nashville to northern Michigan. If there was one character that you thought was going to die before the end of the season, in the next 2 episodes, one character that you would bet on not making it to season 5, who would that character be?
I've been thinking Lloyd. Just of how they've set him up. If someone's got to go, I think it's him. Everyone else, I think they've got to hold on to. Lloyd, we could get rid of.
I won't say Lloyd. I also feel Lloyd, but for the sake of, you already drafted Lloyd in your Yellowstone death pool, so I will have to draft a new first rounder. I do feel like there's going to be another major death to end this season. But the more and more, I feel like the Garrett is going to make it to season 5. But I'm going to bet on Garrett dying to close season 4.
Okay.
He's my first rounder.
Okay. I think they're keeping him, but
there's going to be some sort of scene where Jamie has to choose. And
I'd agree with that.
I still, even though I kind of hate him, I feel like he's going to pick the right Dutton.
To be determined.
do you want to talk about what's going on with Jimmy down at the 4-6's ranch?
Absolutely. The 4-6's ranch, I think, is the best thing that ever happened to Jimmy. That is how I left episode 8. I just feel like Jimmy's coming into his own. Like, we are starting to see who Jimmy is. And even I was like, wow, he's smiling in different things if he seems more comfortable, which is ironic because they set up the 4-6's ranch like it was going to be this hellhole. And I just loved seeing him. And specifically, I loved seeing him and Emily together. And before I touch on that, I just want to get your opinion on what you thought of Jimmy on the 4-6's ranch in this episode.
Well, I'll tell you first off, I would love someone who is truly like an expert in this cowboy ranch life to shoot us an email and maybe even come on the podcast, because they keep talking about how life is so difficult on these ranches. And I believe it. It's not that I don't believe what they're saying. I just haven't seen it. Like, it looks hard, but it doesn't look like brutally hard. I can imagine a more difficult scenario. But Jimmy, an email is staff@tasteofcountry.com if you know that person or if you are that person. But yeah, Jimmy has had this full transformation. This has been his transformative season. He suggested, I think, that he might come back to the Yellowstone Ranch by the end of this season, so I'm kind of looking for that. But I thought those scenes with him and me and Emily, the Emily relationship just feels really natural and easy. Like, they're fun together. Like, he immediately was honest with her, and she was accepting of like how he served a couple of terms in prison. Like, his confidence is at the point where he can kind of, I don't know, he's a much more enjoyable character to watch now, and she's a much more, and she's the girlfriend you root for. When your friend has this girlfriend that you hate, and then he finally dumps her and goes out with the girl that you root for, like, that's who it is. It feels like true love.
Yeah, I completely agree. I left feeling like they were very compatible, and almost, you know, at dinner where he was sharing, you know, he's gone to jail and stuff like that. I think it's cool because that, I think, is fostered by Emily, of like her demeanor and stuff kind of brings Jimmy's walls down. And you kind of see him acting like this little boy of almost, you know, nervous around her. And yeah, I just left thinking like, man, this is a really good pairing. And like you said, their chemistry is really great. And I just never felt that with him and Mia. There was always just a little bit of love tension, if you will, or drama that I was like, man, something just not clicking, and it just seems like it's too hard. Where Emily, it's just, like I said, it's just easy.
Well, the thing with Mia, too, is she kind of forced himself on Jimmy a little. Not that Jimmy wasn't willing, but they never even really went out on a date. Like, really, they were flirting and agreed to go out on a date, but then Jimmy gets hurt on the horse and ends up in the hospital. And then Mia just sort of steps up and agrees to sort of take care of him. And and then his caretaker, like, so Jimmy never really had a say, so to speak, but she just sort of shows up and asserts herself. Whereas at least this time, Jimmy had the chance to court Emily a little bit more officially, which was nice.
You know what I'm looking forward to? When Mia shows up at the 4-6's ranch and Jimmy has to deal with 2 women now. What's going to happen? I don't know, but I'm excited for that drama. Are we ready for fan questions?
Yes. Hit me. How many we got this week?
We have 3 on the docket.
And I have one for you.
Oh no, should we start there? Which way should we go, Billy?
We can. All right, okay. You want yours first, Addison?
I do. I'm a little nervous.
Well, I wouldn't be too nervous. Okay. An emailer named Jared wrote a great email with a number of strong points and ideas. Okay. And I sort of ingest a lot of the comments and things people say via email into sort of developing theories and weighing them against each other. And those are really valuable. So even if I'm not responding, I'm seeing your comments and appreciating the conversation. But Jared had a great email, and it ends with, Addison, it pains me to have to disagree with a fellow Texan this strongly. For the longest time, I never understood the Jamie hate. He handled the pregnancy poorly, and I understand Beth's anger. Truth is, they both acted out of fear. As Beth has said before, she lets fear get her twice, and it cost her mother, and the ability to have kids. She carries a lot of guilt, and Jamie gets burnt of that unfairly at times. However, Jamie has repeatedly fought hard for the Duttons. But that's not the reason John and Beth have turned on him. It began with the meeting that occurred during episode 10 of season 3. Jamie publicly challenged Beth as executor of the trust and was willing to sell the ranch, which was him publicly defying John's wishes. Jamie did a good job of cleaning up the mess after the hits, but to never go visit or make an effort to check on anyone in person after months is hard to understand. John has to know that Garrett is a part of Jamie's life currently. He is anti-Jamie to your pro-Jamie.
Well, Jared, it's okay that you disagree with me, but I'm still pro Jamie.
You're hanging in there with him.
I'm hanging in there with him. I do still think there's, I mean, to your point of, I think at the end of the day, he is eventually going to drop Garrett, who I am not fond of at all. I think he is manipulative, and not to say that Jamie is not, and not to say that John isn't, but Garrett right now, yeah. I'm still pro Jamie. I still just see a glimmer of hope in him that he's going to, after becoming a father overnight, essentially, and just everything else. I still think that he's going to be the character that turns.
He lost me even further this episode, and we didn't talk about Jamie too much previously, but I feel like he chose his side and he threw down the gauntlet in this episode when he decided to run for governor against his dad and believing he could win. Garrett and Christina give him a pep talk. They get him to believe that John Dutton is bluffing and doesn't actually want to be governor, and I think they are running Jamie right into a wood chipper, because I think he's going to end up getting killed or hurt or something along those lines. But he made his choice, I feel like. This episode, there ain't no coming back.
Yeah, he did make his choice, and I do think that this is just setting him up for failure. However, I cannot believe I am like being an advocate for him, but because I would have never said that in the beginning. But I do think a lot of it is out of hurt of, I said this too, of you were excited. You're like, oh yeah, I'm so glad John, kind of had that moment of, haha, stick it to ya, I'm running. I felt bad for Jamie because I was like, Jamie, there's too many J's here. Jamie, because I was like, man, this guy who, is a father figure in his life just kind of trampled him. So I think that there's a little bit of hurt there of like, well, forget you. Yeah, I'm going to run. And the people who technically, allegedly are on my side right now, Christina and Garrett, are for me, and they're telling me, encouraging me in a certain way. They're on my team. I'll say, okay, I'll follow them. I don't know. I think this is much more deep of, I think it's just a lot of hurt deep down, but Yellowstone also might not be getting that deep, and I might just be rabbit holing over here. So to Jared's point, he might have a point, and I might be going way too emotionally in depth to this.
Possibly. All right, go ahead. What do you got for me this week?
From HR Holm, he says, why isn't the COVID pandemic addressed? No one wears masks, not even the slightest mention of how the situation affects the ranch or characters, or even of its existence.
I'm good with this decision. Like, I think he's right. They haven't addressed it at all. But I think by and large, shows that have relied on COVID or had kind of forced it as part of the narrative have really lost me. There's an NBC show called New Amsterdam that I tried to watch, and I'm living it already. If I'm going to watch a television show, I don't necessarily need to see it. And I thought early on maybe we'd get a lot of country songs too that at least spoke to where we are in life, and I was totally wrong there, and I'm glad about that. Like, I don't need my entertainment dalliances to also be heavy with COVID talk. So I think it was just a decision maybe made by Taylor Sheridan that, like, hey, we don't need to address this. We got enough drama going on in this show. We don't need to add a pandemic.
Okay, question 2 from Jamie. Every season, the wolf shows up for Casey. There is some sort of significance with it. Billy, I'm still personally confused with the wolf, so I don't have much here.
That was an odd scene. Jamie's on his porch. He sees a wolf. He calls up Mo, and Mo tells him there's not supposed to be any wolves, but to not shoot the wolf because it's a test, and he has to talk to Rainwater about it. The wolf did show up in season 3 quite a bit. oddly, it kept on showing up when Casey and Monica were like, they were outdoors camping a lot, and they would find themselves together and alone, and they'd lay down in the woods together, and the wolf would watch them make love. It was kind of an odd wolf thing to do, but the wolf did that. A voyeuristic wolf out there somewhere. But I don't remember the wolf showing up in seasons 1 or 2, but maybe it did. Is it a parable? Like someone mentioned that maybe it means like the wolf's at the door sort of thing. That's the best I can do with it. Is it's symbolic of something.
Yeah, I'd assume so, but I did think it's odd. I'm like, where does this wolf keep coming from? And why don't shoot it? Because it's a test. Our last one, if you are ready for it, from Amanda, it's a prediction that Garrett and John are brothers. When John took his dad up to the mountain, the father said this was for him and his, quote, brother.
That was from the season 3, the final episode of season 3. At the very beginning of that episode, we see the flashback sequence of the younger John Dutton, and he's with his father on the mountain, and that's the death scene of the father. The father ends up dying. Chris Stapleton's song "Daddy Doesn't Pray" is playing. It's an emotional scene to sort of start that episode, but he does say that this is all for him and his brother. And to that point, and since, we have not had reference of any John Dutton brother. I think a lot of people believe that Garrett is somehow closer to John than John has shared, be it possibly his late wife's brother or late wife's brother-in-law. A John Garrett brother relationship. I'll get down with that. I mean, that'd be a really cool twist.
Yeah.
That I hadn't really given too much thought of, but it's a plausible prediction or a plausible theory. You know, we've certainly shared more implausible theories on this podcast, so I like that.
Well, I will say, I'm just thinking of poor Jamie. If that is true, I think, I don't know. I don't know. I just think that would do him in.
Did you listen when we talked to Jefferson White? Jefferson White said his craziest fan theory he ever heard was that Casey was really dead to start season 4.
Yes.
And he's like, oh, that theory was crazy. I'm like, oh, I don't know anything about that. Whoever had that theory must have been nutso. And really, I think he was probably talking about us.
I think so,
that was
too.
the theory we ran with really hard for a couple of hours, and then we realized, oh yeah, that probably doesn't make any sense at all. So
it still was one of my favorites.
Like,
huh? Funny, I think I've heard that before.
Like, yeah, Jefferson, there are some nutsos out there.
That's our favorite Yellowstone conspiracy theorist, Billy Dukes. As always, share your theories at staff@tasteofcountry.com. The conversation is half the fun. I'm Addison Hager, and next up on the Dutton Rules podcast is interviews with Cole Hauser and Piper Perabo, followed by a recap of episode 3 of 1883, starring Tim McGraw and Faith Hill. More cast interviews and episode recaps can be found in the archives. Tap follow and give a 5-star review if you've enjoyed listening to today's breakdown of Yellowstone. Dutton Rules, a Yellowstone 1883 podcast, is written by myself and Billy Dukes and produced by Billy Dukes. A sincere thanks to the thousands of listeners and the hundreds of thousands who found us on YouTube as well. There's much more to come. Dutton Rules is another great Town Square Media podcast.